Hello everybody, welcome to the 2023 Irmo's Juneteenth celebration. I'm Barry Walker, the mayor of Irmo, and I'm here with Mr. William Bowman, who's the chairman of the Juneteenth committee, as well as our Irmo historian. Hi, I'd like to give you a brief history of the town of Irmo, South Carolina that I have researched and found out. You know, back in 1865, at the end of the Civil War, the Lorick Plantation was a huge plantation spreading out thousands of acres from basically Ballantyne all the way to Lexington County. They incorporated hundreds and hundreds of slaves. At the end of the war, when all the slaves were emancipated, those slaves didn't just disappear. They ended up settling along the Congaree River, along the banks, along the railroad tracks, and they settled into a little area that we know today as Irmo, South Carolina. Now, think about this. In 1890, when the town was incorporated, there was no way that Ben Pitchfork Tillman would have allowed a group of African Americans, freed slaves, to come to him with a petition to settle the town or incorporate the town. But these two railroad men did. One, Iredale and Mosley. Mosley was a sawmill operator, and Iredale was a railroad man. He had made a railroad stop in Irmo to get fuel and wood for his trains that were on their way to Newberry and down to Charleston and Columbia. But those two men got together and they filled out the paperwork that was necessary to incorporate Irmo. And in Christmas Eve, 1890, that documentation was signed and put into place. And that's when Irmo became an official town. Mind you, it already existed before. We had Indians living here. We had African Americans, freed African American slaves living here. They all were settling along the banks of the Congaree River and the Saluda River. So that little brief history gave us some background to where we were back in 1890. So now, remember now, in 1911, when Harbison College, or the Ferguson Academy, was in Abbeville, South Carolina, they relocated to Irmo, South Carolina, and they were given 20 acres of land from Mr. Samuel P. Harbison. And he allowed them to settle the college where it exists today, on the campus of Midlands Tech. Now, think about this back then. 1911, you have a brand new school for African Americans. You have no financial support except for the Presbyterian Church, who was supporting you financially. But you set out to educate people, educate these newly freed African American slaves, and get them a start in life. And that's what they did at Midlands Tech, at the Midlands Tech Harbison campus, which was later renamed the Harbison College. Now, Dr. Calvin Young, C.M. Young, was the first president of the college, and he was able to put together a curriculum which taught some people how to do agricultural development, agricultural science, as well as give them a dorm setting where the students would live on campus, do their studies, work the fields, and then pay their tuition by basically working the campus. If you think about it back then, they couldn't go to Kroger to buy their chickens and their groceries. They had to grow their own groceries. They had to grow their own vegetables. They had to raise their own chickens, and they had to grow their own okra, because that was the way they survived. That's the way they supported themselves. Now, Mr. Bowman is going to take us from the 1950s, because that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the educational boom in Irmo, South Carolina. Mr. Bowman is going to tell us about the history, the present-day history of Irmo from the 1950s on. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Bowman. William, thank you.
Thank you.
William,
Yes.
tell us about what you learned or what you discovered. I mean, we're going to go through the panels, but just tell me in a synopsis-wise, what happened back in 1951? Did we have an equilibrium or educational system that worked for African Americans back then?
Well, I'd say that, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. And as a lifelong resident of Irmo, growing up here, The educational system was always strong, coming from Harbison Institute, which my father attended and my cousin, as well as a lot of the individuals that graduated from that institute. They went on to local colleges. My father went to South Carolina State College, and a lot of Allen University, a lot of other local colleges. And then there was a draft, which happened during that period as well. In addition to that, Rich Lex School was also in the area here. And Rich Lex was a place where it was a special place because it was a place where a lot of the teachers and instructors and the faculty not only worked at the school, but they lived in the community. And so a lot of the churches growing up, a lot of the churches in the area, you saw people that taught you during the week at school.
At church on Sunday.
On church on Sunday, yeah. So it was a really growing and thriving, tight network community.
Talk about Rich Lex now. Rich Lex is a combination of Richland County and Lexington County, is that right?
Correct.
So they put those two together and called it Rich Lex School?
They called it Rich Lex, and it was a segregated school, and it was there to provide an education for the African Americans in the Irmo area. Needless to say, they had to endure some hardships such as secondhand books, secondhand band uniforms, football uniforms that were received from the district. And it made things difficult at times, but it also, I think, made a lot of the students stronger because of their desire to be educated.
But y'all produced some doctors and lawyers and educators out of that hardship, out of that.
Yes. There are a lot of there are a lot of individuals that came out of that whole Rich Lex model that were really instrumental in some things locally and nationally. And they also encourage the younger generation to continue their education and to not stop with just a bachelor's degree as well.
Okay, well, we are at the first panel here, and you're going to talk to us about this Rich Lex School that we mentioned. This is the only African-American school in District 5. And this school was dedicated to educate all the small African-American children from grade 1 through grade 12. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so tell us about these people. Who are these people?
Well, first of all, let me introduce you to Mr. Robert Lee Floyd. And Mr. Floyd was the principal at Rich Lex High School from 1958 until 1963 until 1968. And Mr. Floyd was responsible for maintaining the school as well as trying to seek funds from the district to manage the school. And as you can see, some of the buildings here were basic standard grade school, middle school, high school buildings. But
Still stand today.
still stand today. Yes. And actually, once the schools were integrated, Rich Lex became Dutch Fork Elementary School. There was a vibrant faculty there of ladies and gentlemen that taught, and as I had previously mentioned, a lot of them lived in the neighborhoods. They worked in the churches. They were heavily involved in the community where they worked and lived. And so it made quite an impact on, I think, the students and the individuals in the Irmo community because they were so involved. As I stated, we had quite a list here, and you can see here there are a lot of the teachers, faculty members from Rich Lex High School that are here. And I'd like to point out my mother right here, who is one of the teachers of 6th grade here, as well as
So wait a minute,
Ms.
your
Brunella
mother
Riley.
taught at Rich Lex?
Correct.
So that means if you got in trouble, you heard about it. You weren't even born yet, but if you had went to school there.
Well, I was a little kid at the time. I was born while she was a teacher there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you got in trouble, you got
Yes.
all those teachers
That's correct.
that would know about it and know you,
Right.
and would be able to get the word back to your mom before you got home.
That's right.
If you didn't get in trouble already with Dr. Dr. Floyd.
With Mr. Floyd. That's correct. That is
That was
correct.
tough growing up, wasn't it?
Oh, it was tough. It was tough, but it kept you straight. It kept you straight. And some of the teachers here, Ms. Ritter, a lot of teachers here were Sunday school teachers of mine at Young's Chapel AME Church. So you just had a lot of people that were here, and just to name some, Mr. Godbold, Mr. Thomas Kinley, as I stated, Ms. Ritter,
Is that-
Ms. Levan,
That
Ms. Zadie Morris.
Jasper Haley taught agriculture. Is that the Haley on Eastern Drive? That's his son, isn't it?
Correct. That's
So
Alvin.
the people still live here whose parents were taught at this school.
That's correct.
They still live in the community.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's still quite a few that live around the area, and as well, Miss Bower, wife of Judge Harold Bower, taught at Rich Lex as well. So there were a lot of individuals here who were faculty members, and they provided their skills and their gifts of education to the children in the Irmo community. And I want to tell you that when you came out of Rich Lex, that you received a strong education. It was a really strong education. And that was even with secondhand books, secondhand uniforms with band, secondhand uniforms with football, and a lot of the, there were some buses, but a lot of the kids in the early days walked home. And so some of the students walked miles to school every day. But I think that Rich Lex was an integral part of the development of the Irmo community.
Now, William, this is one of the prominent families, the Corley families in the Irmo community. Their history goes back to 1891. Tell us about this family and significant contributions they made to the community.
Well, the Corley family is like you said, one of the prominent older families in the community of Irmo. And just to talk about them as farmers, as property owners, some of the Corleys, Corley and Henry Corley as well, dedicated and donated the property to the Pleasant Springs churches in Colston area. And so, but let me mention one of the prominent fixtures in Irmo with the Corley family is Jim Corley, and affectionately known as Daddy Jim. And growing up as a kid around Irmo, you always saw Daddy Jim walking around and speaking and talking to people. Well, Daddy Jim was a World War II veteran, and he also was prominent around the city, and he received the Order of the Palmetto, as well as he was the Grand Marshal with the orchestra for 2 years here in Irmo, and was highly regarded and highly recognized around the town of Irmo by many. And as you can see here, with family members, when he was recognized for his 91st birthday, Ms. Lily Corley, Ms. B. Burkett, Ms. Agnes Bell, some of the other pictures as a part of that Corley family. Very large family, a lot of prominent individuals coming out of the Corley family, and it moved on through from Rich Lex to Irmo High School with a lot of prominent athletes and scholars coming out of that family.
Okay, William, let's fast forward a little bit to the modern day Irmo High School, because that's above my speed. You know, I graduated, I went to high school in 1977. and I graduated in 1979, and I was the first, and this is in Norwalk, Connecticut, where I grew up.
Okay.
So I can imagine in Norwalk, we had a brand new high school. It was modern technology at the time. We experienced integration. You know, it was blacks and whites were mixed together. We had a mixed football team, mixed basketball team. How was it down here in Irmo, South Carolina back then? Because you went to Irmo High School.
Correct.
And so tell us about that.
Well, I graduated in 1980 from Irmo High School, and during that time, or the years in high school, it had integrated, and things flowed fairly smooth. We had able to play on football, basketball, baseball, tennis, a variety of sports. I think what was limited with Irmo during that time were the amount of African Americans in the faculty. Coming out of Rich Legs, a lot of the older kids were used to having more African Americans working in the faculty. That's one of the things that I think is not thought about with integration. When the schools integrated, they didn't move all the African American teachers into the flow of Irmo High School. They only took a couple teachers or a few faculty members. The rest had to find employment in other counties surrounding the Irmo area. My mother actually transferred, and she went to Department of Juvenile Justice, and she taught at John G. Richards, as did many others. So that's one of the misnomers about integration, that everything merged together. But nevertheless, I think that there were some really strong individuals that did transfer to Irmo High School from Rich Legs, namely Miss Burnett O'Reilly was one of the teachers there, Miss Lottie Johnson, Mr. Fred Godbold,
Cecil Halterwanger.
and Mr. Halterwanger.
Yeah.
Yes. So there were some really, really good teachers that transitioned and really held the line for supporting and helping our students doing integration into Irmo High School. There were a lot of students that integrated there as well, and were first and notables in their own way. We have Reverend, who is today known as Reverend Maxine Reed. She was a basketball player for Irmo High School.
Wait, Maxine Sumter?
Yes.
Played basketball?
Yes.
Wow,
She
okay.
played basketball.
That's
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. And
I never knew that.
yes, yes, she's right here.
Yeah.
And Nancy Javis also played basketball, and Shirley Porty was the first African American cheerleader at Irmo High School. Might I say that also Leonard Metz was the first African American drum major for the band at Irmo High School. So you had individuals integrating the baseball team. You had individuals integrating the football team as well.
They look kind of small back then, man. Is that
Yes.
true?
No, they look really big. Yeah. They were big.
Okay.
They were big. But Irmo was a very prominent school, a very proud school. We were all very proud to be students there, and just growing up in the area and just developing and going to church in the area and going to school. It was a very, very close-knit community, and still is today. When you talk about the history of Irmo, one of the individuals, key individuals I'd like to mention is Miss Margaret Giger Hall. Miss Margaret Hall was the first African American to work at the District 5, Lexington Richland District 5 office. Following integration, she was hired by Lexington Richland 5 to work as a secretary with the district. And so for many years, she was the lone African American working there until Mr. Floyd was hired later to work at the district. Another prominent family here in the Irmo area, and I think that needs noting, is the Wilson family. And the Wilson family is a mother, Miss Teresa Wilson, which was my teacher at Irmo High School. Miss Wilson was loved by all, and she was also involved in school club sponsorship, where we raised money for different events around Irmo. And Ms. Wilson was instrumental in the support and encouragement of African American students at Irmo High School. In addition, her daughter, which is also Teresa Wilson, is the Columbia City manager at this time. She's a graduate of Irmo as well. And her son, Stephen Wilson, is an Irmo graduate and is currently the vice president of Five Below Corporation. Another notable from the town of Irmo is the great Marion Reeves. Marion Reeves was a outstanding student and football player for Irmo High School. Marion transitioned to Clemson University as its first African American athlete. Marion started his football career with Clemson University in 1970, and Marion also went on to play in the professional football league with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Marion Reeves. Marion is still here in Irmo today and is the pastor at Pleasant Spring AME Church here in Irmo. Another prominent resident of Irmo is Dr. Shirley Martin Porty. Shirley Porty was the first African American involved in student government and at Irmo High School, and the first cheerleader, African American cheerleader for Irmo High School. Dr. Shirley Porty did a lot around the Irmo High School and Irmo community. She attended the University of South Carolina, where she received her master's and her doctorate degree, and she is currently a superintendent of schools and retired in the Low Country area. Dr. Shirley Porty Martin was the first African American at Irmo High School cheerleader. Another notable from the town of Irmo is Miss Eunice B. Dowdy. Miss Dowdy was a distinguished healthcare professional, and as a result of her work with the Department of Mental Health, the building Dowdy Gardner Nursing Care Center was named in her honor. Myrtle Beatty Wilson, the first African American postmaster for the town of Irmo. Mr. John Jeff Corley Sr., one of the prominent Corley family members here in the town of Irmo. Mr. Corley was the first African American board member elected to the Lexington County School District 5. He was also on the Mid-Carolina Electric Cooperative Trust Board. Ms. Florence Metz Reeves. Mrs. Reeves was a head nurse with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and she was a head nurse at the Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital. Mrs. Edith Cook Burkett. Ms. Cook Burkett was a 1969 graduate of Irmo High School, where she was a star basketball player, and she became the first African American to play for the women's basketball at the University of South Carolina. Judge Harold Bowman, an African American pioneer of the civil rights movement. Judge Bowell hails from right here in the town of Irmo, South Carolina. He was the chief attorney on the historic Briggs versus Elliott case, which merged into the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case, the decision that halted segregation in the United States. Jerome Singleton Jr., Paralympian. Chief Frank Leaphart, first African-American chief of police for the town of Irmo. Mr. Gene Wilson, owner of Gene Wilson Construction Company. He is hailed from the town of Irmo. He is a businessman, he was an entrepreneur, and he also was the developer and builder of the Harbison Trails here in Irmo. Kevin Lyles. Kevin is a graduate of Irmo High School. Kevin is the executive director for the First Tee project in Columbia, and he is also a golf instructor, and he played on the PGA Tour. Sarah E. Bowman. Ms. Bowman was the first African American to serve on the Irmo Election Commission. As a result of her work in the community, Ms. Bowman was also recognized by a street named after her that runs through the Irmo Orchestra Park. In addition to that, Ms. Bowman is my mother. Mr. Elliott Washington. Mr. Elliott Washington was the first African American car salesman for the Marion Burnside Chrysler Plymouth in Columbia, South Carolina. Hailing from Irmo, South Carolina, Mr. Burnside, Mr. Washington was also prominent in the community here and a noted singer. Miss Kiera Streeter, businesswoman, entrepreneur. During the COVID-19 pandemic, her company was able to create over 10,000 job opportunities in the Irmo area here, as well as bring free COVID-19 testing to Irmo and the state of South Carolina. Mr. Henry J. Corley. Mr. Corley was a true pioneer and well respected in the Irmo community. He was a farmer and a businessman. He owned a syrup mill and a blacksmith shop, as well as 400 acres of land in both Richland and Lexington counties. He provided the land for building of the Pleasant Spring AME Church here in Irmo, which now stands on Cold Spring Drive and Old Bush River Road. A prominent, respected man in the community, Mr. Henry J. Corley. Mrs. Martha A. Corley. Ms. Corley is a true pioneer in the Irmo community. She is one of the original teachers at Rich Lakes High School, which was segregated school for African American students during South Carolina's segregation period. Mrs. Corley stands to turn 100 years old next month. Mayor Barry Walker, the first African American mayor of the town of Irmo. Mayor Walker served on the Irmo Town Council for 15 years and once on Max on Main restaurant in Columbia, South Carolina. He was known as Chef Fatback for his southern culinary creations. He was elected as the first African American mayor for the town of Irmo, South Carolina in 2019. He is married to the First Lady, Susan Walker, and they have 3 children. Mayor Walker received his bachelor's degree from the University of Connecticut in mathematics. Under the leadership of Mayor Walker, the town has grown and developed, namely in areas such as the Irmo Town Community Park, the at-risk youth zones that the mayor has developed in collaboration with area churches and with the District 5 school board, as well as how he has developed an excellent police and fire. Clemente C. Pinckney, renowned American pastor and politician. At 18 years of age, while attending Allen University, Reverend Pinckney received his first church assignment, which was Young's Chapel AME Church, located in downtown Irmo. Gerald Witt, first African-American principal at Irmo High School. Mr. Witt is a well-respected educator in both Richland and Lexington District 5 and Greenwood District 50. Mr. Witt became the first African-American principal at Irmo High School in 1995. He served as the principal there until 2005. Prior to Mr. Witt becoming the principal at Irmo High School, He was the varsity football coach, driver's ed teacher at Irmo High School, and he also coached the track team. Having a variety of talents in the Irmo area, this is our author's corner and poet. The first one is Timothy L. Reeves, a published author, and his book, Parkinson's Spaces, How One Man Facing Parkinson's Leads Everyday Life. Timothy L. Reeves. Here in the Poets Corner, another one of our notable authors and poets is my sister, Linda Darnell Bowman. Linda has written a variety of poems and published 3 books. 2 of the books we have here, Gems of Revelation, is a book of poetry, and my favorite, After the Storm, a mental snapshot of a woman at war. Linda Bowman was in Desert Storm and wrote this book as a result of her involvement with Desert Storm and a lifelong journey to the military. Edith Cook Burkett. In addition to being a star athlete and graduate of Irmo High School, in addition to going on to the University of South Carolina and being the first African American to play basketball on the women's basketball team, Edith Cook Burkett is also an inspiring poet and author. And her book, An Angel's Whisper, is an inspiring poetry by Edith Cook Burkett.
Well, William, thank you so much for that history tour of Irmo.
Thank you.
And you have just, you've given us such an enlightenment of what we have accomplished in such a short time in the town of Irmo, especially African Americans. I want to make sure that people know out there that we have a history. We have a very illustrious history. We have some illustrated poets, illustrated authors, musicians, as well as athletes and politicians.
That's right.
So knowing all of that, I wanted to make sure that this Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, remember now, the slaves got emancipated way back in April, but they didn't get the word until June out in Galveston, Texas. That's how slow that information passed. But nowadays with the internet and YouTube and Facebook, this will be instantaneously on for the whole world to see, that they can showcase our talent, Irmo, South Carolina. And I'm proud that you were able to do this.
Well, thank you very much.
And also, I want to keep y'all focused, because the next thing y'all see is the inaugural Juneteenth pageant being led by Miss Edna Samuels. She will be presenting that to y'all next. So y'all sit tight. Thank you for watching this very long video, but very important video about the history of Irmo, South Carolina. Thank y'all very much.